On the other side of business expansion is physical business expansion. And this is, to be honest, where I spent most of my time as a business advocate and in project management at the DGC. It's also what I think is the fun part, right? Like, doing a lot of paperwork about getting your business open, while essential, is not sexy. But when you start getting out there and you're like, you know, this is where I'm hanging out my shingle, this is my presence in the world, this is what I want to do, if you have that type of business, is kind of that fun and exciting piece. And I just like building stuff, so that's kind of my own side. Physical expansion is going to bring you into two departments, largely. It's going to take you to buildings and safety, which makes sense, right? And also, in a lot of cases, planning and development, for a couple of different reasons. And we'll go through those right now. When you're looking at your facility, the first place that you're going to end up going, in most cases, is buildings and safety. I cannot stress to you enough that this needs to happen before you buy or lease your space. I know that I'm sounding like I'm emphatic about this, but it's because I am. Most people would come to me with these types of issues, and they would say, hey, Brian, I am opening business X, I lease this space, I love that block, and then found out that they cannot do what it is that they want to do in that space. That is a function of zoning. These are things that, you know, are easily missed. And in some cases, it's not missed by lack of attention. You have people that are opening, for instance, a barbershop in a space that was a barbershop. Common sense would dictate, I just took over this barbershop. It is what it is. I'm not changing the use. I'm good to go. You go downtown to get your certificate of compliance, and they tell you, you can't have a certificate of compliance because the person before you didn't have a certificate of compliance. Oh, and by the way, that place was never registered as a barbershop. It was registered as a retail outlet or something different. A couple of things can happen. One, it could be something where you're zoned appropriately. Zoning runs with the land. It says what you can do in certain areas. And the zoning is appropriate where all you need to do is a change of use. It's still a little bit challenging because in order for me to do a change of use, I have to submit signed, sealed documents from an architect. That's money. I'm going to have to get another series of inspections for a certificate of occupancy versus a certificate of compliance. More money. These are things that you don't want to be spending money on if you can avoid it. In some cases, not avoidable, but at least you want to know on the front. Code, same thing. It's a little bit different than zoning because it runs with the building or the build out of a facility as opposed to just what the land is used for. But it's something that you can have checked. You can have a zoning clearance check, you can have a code clearance check to find out that the place that you're buying either has a clean bill of health, essentially, or does not. In some cases, it's very evident. You know that you're going in to do a project, but these are things that you want to see on the front end. Before I get to plan review can take into account buildings and safety and planning and development. Sticking with buildings and safety, still on the 4th floor KMAG, when you go into plan review, this is where you say, you know what, I know what I'm doing. I know the space that I've chosen. I talked to you guys about a zoning clearance check. I know where I'm at. And I want to do this. You come in, set of plans, they review your plans with planning review. They pull the record that you already asked about. They tell you that these couple of things need to be changed or maintained to get a new clearance. We move you through that way. Planning and development on occasion gets involved here. On a plan review side, if you are in an area of the city that is that has a Main Street overlay, for instance, these are the areas that we want to make more walkable or areas of certain attention at the city. Planning and development will come and they'll look at your design of your exterior. They'll look at the design of your signage. They'll look at, you know, your facade or the front of your building to see if it fits under the guidelines of that Main Street overlay. Just so you know, places that you'll see things like that, Grandmont Rosedale has one, the Villages have one, Livernois Avenue has one. So you'll see them in different places. That's generally when you'll interface with planning and development on plan review side. And then the certifications that I alluded to earlier, where I said you need either a certificate of occupancy or a certificate of compliance. Two different things, very similar. They both say that you're legal to open and operate. If you are changing the use of your facility, if your facility was abandoned and you've rebuilt it, or if you are building a new building or a new facility, you will need a certificate of occupancy, which basically means I've gone through plan review, and I'm going to have a stringent inspection by all of my trades: plumbing, electrical, mechanical, and buildings. Certificate of compliance is easier to obtain. If you're opening a barber shop, and it was a barber shop legally, all you need is a certificate of compliance, which means we send out one inspector to do a general review throughout the property maintenance division. They say, you know what, nothing is grossly bad. You don't have, an electrical box that's not connected, because then we'll call electrical. Your plumbing's not all jacked up, or we'll call plumbing. But essentially, if everything's in good working order, they propel you through the system and you're good to go. When you are, again, this pertains to people that are expanding, as well as folks that are looking to maybe reinvest in an area or reactivate a space. Planning and development is also the place where we go for city-owned property acquisition. They have a real estate division. And the reason that I bring this up is because it does actually tie into the plan review and use of a space. And here's why. And this is a situation that's quite common. You buy a building that was out of use, abandoned. You know that you're going to do a build out. You know that you're going to put a print shop in it. In the city code, a print shop carries certain stipulations for licensure. One of the big ones is parking, and that's generally for any business here, unless you're in a special use district. So let's just assume that you need parking. The way that a lot of our buildings are structured, and I'm using one because I have one in mind, so I'll tell a story. There is a building that a client came to me with on the corner of Kirchhoff and Van Dyke. It was a bank building. The building is surrounded by lots that do not go with the building. They're city-owned. He wants to put in a small produce shop. He needs X number of parking spaces that he does not have on his land. In order for him to get licensed and open a produce shop, he has to provide these parking spaces, or go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, but let's just keep it simple. He needs to provide a certain number of parking spaces. What he had to do was he looked at the map. All of those lots were owned by the city. He had to go to planning and development to acquire the appropriate number of spaces. This is one of those things you want to look into on the front, because if you don't, and those lots are not available, or they're privately owned, or you have to negotiate on the back, or you have to do these things, you will have built a building that you cannot open. This is why you need to know what you're doing and where you're doing it. So, land acquisition is currently, and I'm saying this in real time, okay? So, and when I say that, I mean, we know that there's some things happening downtown, but in real time, the real estate division is held in planning and development. So as you look into the zoning clearance, the code of the business that you want to do, you want to look at those surrounding areas. And these are some things that you want to get on the front end. Because if you find out you can't get those lots, you find out you can't open, you find yourself in a situation where you're not generating revenue on something that you bought. And this goes to really leveraging the city, really using what they already have in place, is contracting opportunities. So there's a few places to find these, and largely this depends on the business that you're in. If you're in a general retail business, not so much. If you're in a service business, if you're in a catering business, if you're in a business where you can do construction, these do matter to you. The city has set up essentially 3 easy places to find contracting opportunities. The largest and most prevalent is the city of Detroit. It's handled through the finance department in the purchasing division. You will see, if you go to the website, City of Detroit, Finance, Purchasing, you will see a list of outstanding contracting opportunities. You can then break that list up based on the area of work. It's a great resource. DWSD is Department of Water and Sewerage. They also have a procurement division with a pretty broad spectrum of contracts. Obviously, a lot of those are in construction, plumbing, maintenance, heavy construction. And then the DEGC has RFPs, or requests for proposals, around development projects on a pretty regular basis. DEGC is Detroit Economic Growth Corporation. If you go to degc.org, under Project Management Division, they'll have contracts there. And again, this can range from construction to building acquisition, if they want to, if they're looking to turn buildings over to developers, what have you. That's kind of where this shook out as I read, you know, what the task was, how to leverage city departments for the expansion of your business. And I found these to be kind of the most important areas. But what I'm willing to do, and this, you know, because of the nature of being the business advocate, which is essentially what I do now as well, it's sometimes easier to hear specific questions which create cases. And I would be more than happy at this point to, if I have a little bit of time, to take some specific scenarios. If you have a question about where to go, or if you have a question about how to put a business in a certain place, that's something that I can do now. If anyone has anything. Yes, ma'am.
My question is regarding the contract. Do the city of Detroit also have minimum number or percentages of minority companies that they have to deal with when they offer those contracts?
Yes. It's, and I couldn't give you the number, but it's under the series of executive orders. So as they extend business opportunities, there are percentages, and they generally hit each of those categories. They want Detroit residents, Detroit headquartered and based businesses, and minority and women-owned businesses.
I have a question about parking.
Yes.
So a lot of, I mean, this is obviously, as you suggested, a situation that's in all cities a problem. So how do you find out what the parking restrictions are, and if there are no available parking spaces near you because you're in a densely populated commercial area, what are your options? Like how far or close does the parking have to be?
Great question. And I'll take that in two parts. So to your first question, how do you find out? The easiest thing to do is to go to the zoning office in Buildings and Safety and say, I'm looking at this address. They'll pull a map with you, and a couple of things will happen from the zoning and the typology of the business. It's the type of the business that dictates the number of spaces that you need. That's code. The zoning will tell you whether that business is legal in that space, and then the map will show where the available parking is. And there's a parking distance that's indicated in the code as well. To your second point, or to your second question, if you are in a densely populated area, which a lot of these are, because our streetscapes were built such that they were walkable in our neighborhood commercial centers, there's a couple of things that can happen. One, the city is working on what's called an SD1, SD2 Special Development District. It's a special use designation, mixed use designation, that will allow for a relaxing of the parking rules. Right now, it's most evident in Midtown. They're kind of using that as a pilot area. But it's going to come online in those districts where you have continuous facades, where you have multiple buildings, no breaks between them, which is good. That's what we want. We want people to walk. We want them to walk by the stores. We want them to engage the community. We get it. In those cases, they're looking at expanding the distance to your parking. For instance, Livernois Avenue, I don't know if you guys are familiar, but there are a couple of flat lots there that are not right in front of or right next to a business, and they're extending some of the requirements, allowing you to walk X number of feet, which gets you to the parking lot. If all else fails, you can go to the Board of Zoning Appeals. And if you have a good model, and we can structure, like you have a business that is appropriately zoned, you would have to make the argument that it's, you know, of benefit to that area, which that's not a very difficult argument to make, and that you cannot do that business without a parking allowance, that building will stay vacant. You can build a case with the BZA that can allow removal of the restriction. I will be honest, generally in those cases you are going to have to find handicap parking space or two, depending on your use. A lot of times that can even be on the street, and you can ask for that designation for municipal parking.